Mr. Nhlanhla Sibisi. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, thanks. And,
Welcome to Soweto TV.
Well, thank you for having us.
Just a lot of people actually don't understand your work that you do. They just know that you are from the recording industry of South Africa. Just take us through what you do, maybe even into the historical context of your work.
Well, perhaps let me start off with how I joined the industry. I joined what was called Association of South African Music Industries in 1999. So it's a long time ago.
Yes.
In 2000, we decided to change it. And the reason we changed it was because RISA represented record companies in the main, right? And not the entire South African music industries. So we changed the name ASAMI to RISA, which is the recording industry of South Africa, just so that it's clear who we represent. And back then, obviously, cassette was a big thing. CDs were a big thing. The industry, in a sense, was a lot bigger than it is today.
Okay.
And I think bigger only because during that time, although there was piracy and we had invested a lot of money in trying to curb music piracy, because a lot of people believe, you know what, if I take a cassette or a CD and I duplicate it, no one suffers as a result of my action.
Yes, yes.
But they forget that there's a whole value chain. The artist that goes and records actually employs sound engineers, right? The composer that writes the music benefits from that record.
That process. It's actually a whole, it's a chain.
It is a value chain involving several breadwinners, if I may say that, including the artist himself or herself. So whenever we involve ourselves in that act of stealing, because that's really what it is, right?
Yes.
Once you break it down to that it is actually stealing someone's work, and yet you claim you are a fan. And I don't think we realize that. We always say, I love this artist, but if you love someone, you're not going to steal from them.
Because when you talk about that, I want us to talk about something very pertinent. We just came from a very busy period, which is festive season.
Exactly.
Everyone else plays music. People get happy, or maybe artists, that their music is being played. But if your music is being played through pirated means, then it makes no sense then for them to be able to be working so hard, yet someone out there is actually there stealing that bread from them.
Exactly. I think there's a lot of education that must go into making the consumers and the fans understand that the act of copying, dubbing someone's work without their permission is stealing. In fact, it gets worse, because I think we also need to educate DJs, for instance, because they have USBs. And I can assure you that a lot of them would not have gone and acquired a license and paid for that license so that they can reproduce someone else's work. So it's all about us as the recording industry educating people about what it means to buy legitimate music. The reason why some of the country's recording industry's economy are big is because their consumers buying music. So we need to be able to say, we've moved from CDs, we are now in the digital space. It has been made so much easier. I mean, you have the likes of Apple Music, you have Deezer, you have Spotify. Spotify, by the way, is free because it gets its revenue and pays the recording industry and everyone in the value chain through advertisement.
Yes.
So there's no excuse to go and download hundreds of songs onto your USB without paying for them.
So let's talk about, this is a very important issue, because a lot of artists have gone broke over the years. We've seen how that has affected them. And you would have the public that would then say, we didn't know that this one is broke. What happened to the money? And they don't seem to understand the impact this has had over the years. And somehow it doesn't seem like also the government, when it comes to legislation, they're seemingly getting it tighter there. What's your views on that?
I think we are getting there, and I'm saying we're getting there because there are plans afoot to amend the legislation. There's currently the Performance Protection Amendment Bill as well as the Copyright Amendment Bill. Those two bills are aimed at closing the gap, because the last time the copyright was amended, it was 2002, to introduce what we call needle time, right? Since then, there hasn't been any major amendments. In fact, to close the digital gap, the bill does go to some extent in closing it. However, there are huge issues around the two bills, which has made us as the recording industry to say perhaps we need to go back to the drawing board and look at those problematic provisions and change them so that we can then come up with a legislation that closes the gap. Because the legislation itself doesn't close the gap we're talking about, right? In terms of trying to ensure that if you copy my music and not pay for it, there are adequate the provisions to deal with.
There will be penalties also for all of that.
They actually don't. In fact, what the legislation does, it now almost makes it a free-for-all in terms of copying, right? It makes it difficult for the industry to be sustainable if those provisions are too wide and they are not kept. So there's that fight around saying to the president, please don't sign the bills yet, send them back. Let the copyright industries come together, look at those provisions, and come up with something that works for the South African market.
So now, in terms of your involvement, how deep are you in making sure that you sort of like change the narrative around it and the setup and the way things have happened? Because you actually have a lot of veteran musicians in the country who, a lot of them have complained about the same thing. You were at the SABC when the likes of Don Laka came forward with the fees that they were getting for royalties. And a lot of us were shocked because you would listen to this music on radio, but yet they come back and that. So how has that shifted the discussions with also the artists involved?
Well, certainly very little movement, especially from the SABC side. And I'm saying very little movement in the sense that the SABC still has to pay, for instance, the likes of SAMPRA as a collecting society, because there's a dispute in terms of the music that is being played on SABC. So a lot of the artists that belong to SAMPRA are yet to receive a royalty from the SABC, which is problematic.
So there's a deadlock in this.
There is a deadlock. I think there are arbitration processes that are underfoot. So I am involved to that extent, right? But I'm equally involved in trying to push for the legislation to correct those deficiencies, right? Because if they were to pass the legislation, the amendments as they are now, they're going to create a lot more problems than we currently have. And unfortunately, we've tried. Government needs to understand, for them to create a legislation that deals with problems, they need to involve the real stakeholders.
But then, as you get involved, especially now that this has been prolonged for so many years, doesn't that then, when it comes to litigation, affects you cost-wise? Because you don't have enough money, you know, and then now it gets into the very same pocket where you are saying, we're trying to get more money so that we can safeguard the artist.
It does, and perhaps that's the reason why, if we take the SAMPRA route, SAMPRA has suggested arbitration, and I think the SABC has agreed. So there is arbitration, and now one is hopeful that this year will be the year in which all of these issues get resolved. So that the people that need to benefit from those royalties actually benefit. Because ultimately it's the artist, as you say.
Yes. I mean, this is a very interesting topic, but now, because we have to move to other issues as well. Since you arriving at RISA and you being involved in the intellectual property side of things, how has the fraternity as a whole, the industry, grown over the years, especially from 1990, if I may put it that way?
I think if you look at the curve, the growth curve from 1990 in terms of the recording industry revenues, right? In the 90s, we're probably sitting at just over 1.2 billion rands as a recording industry. You'll be shocked to know we currently are sitting at almost just under 500 million. So it gives you a sense, and this is just the recording industry.
Yes.
In terms of sales. I'm not talking here about live performances, which is another revenue stream for artists, but I'm talking about sales.
So now I want you to then demarcate, let's draw demarcations here,
Yeah.
and so that we, recording artists, and now we have a lot of people who are now doing a lot of live shows now.
Yeah.
What's the difference there, and are you still in a space where you are also monitoring that?
Well, we don't monitor the live space, and I think over the years, it is marginally growing, but we need a lot more live venues for artists. Because I think that to close the gap for artists, they need a lot more of those revenue streams. Our veteran artists, for instance, I think government needs, like they do in the UK, government need to create live performance spaces for them, because that's the only way they can earn revenue. Because some of them are no longer actively participating in new recordings, and therefore are dependent on live performances and the broadcast and public performance of their old songs. So if we can push those two things, the live performance spaces, as well as ensuring that everyone that plays their music actually pays for it.
And you earlier on you spoke about educating.
Exactly.
And any road shows, because when you walk downtown, you see the streets are littered with whole sorts of musical items, movies and all of that. Yet you have the government that you're working with in trying to make sure that you force for this legislation.
Yeah.
And has there been any concerted effort in trying to make sure that this actually gets eradicated, or you just sort of like obliterate all of that?
Yeah, I think from the government side, there needs to do a lot more. I think you do have a counterfeit unit within the Department of Trade and Industry, but I think there's a lot more that can be done in terms of cleaning up the streets, especially with pirated music, because often pirated music leads to more serious crimes, and we've seen that the world over, because it's easy to sell pirated music so that you can then invest in hard crime, like
Yes.
drugs and all of that.
Yes.
So you close the door on pirates, you might close the door on the more serious crime.
Because people use it like someone will say, no, the people are not unemployed, so they are using this as a form of money. So they want to make it like it's a delicate matter so that the government can't get involved. But it's wrong to be robbing artists of so much hard work. That
Basically, what you are saying is that because I am unemployed, I must go and steal. And steal from someone who, if they don't get revenue, they themselves then become unemployed because that's their trade. We forget that some artists, that's their profession. That's all they can do. They are talented, right? We listen to them, we dance to their music, but I don't think we show enough appreciation as fans and consumers.
Has digitalization of the industry somehow changed how you guys conduct business?
Well, it has. I think it has shifted, obviously, from investing a lot of money into the physical CD into marketing it differently, because now it's on digital. I think the biggest push right now, because a lot of people no longer want to own the physical CD
Yes.
or the physical vinyl. Vinyl actually is growing for the niche market,
Yes.
but they want access. So it has moved from ownership to access. So now you have access to millions of music through Apple Music, through Deezer, through Spotify, through Jukes. So all of those legitimate digital service providers make it easy for us as consumers to access music. That's why I'm saying there's no longer an excuse for us to pirate music.
Because I'm saying there's a lot of your artists that came in the 80s, I mean in the 80s years, 90s.
90s, yeah.
You see them that they're struggling now. A lot is not happening, and somehow it's like they just couldn't catch up with the trends and everything else. Is there a way, maybe, in terms of being able to build a much more stronger institutional memory within the industry that you're trying to work around to see if you can secure some of their property rights?
Yeah. I think some of them do own their intellectual property, some don't. I think we need to distinguish between those that want to be just performers and those that would then invest in their recordings. We do have shining examples of record companies that own their own local record companies, from your Kalawa to your MTU Music. All of those guys, to 999, own their own intellectual property. To own it, as you know, you must then invest in your own recording. But because not everyone has the money to invest in recording themselves, they prefer to have a record company investing in their recording. Now, it's about the type of agreement they enter into with the relevant record company.
Doesn't that make them vulnerable when it comes to your international, corporate, and let's say maybe if there is anything globally that they need to be involved in? Because I'm asking this because now in the US there is a decision that is pending based on the property rights, and So how far are you in terms of engaging your stakeholders with that?
I think that comes out of the Copyright Amendment Bill as well as the Performance Protection Amendment Bill. There is a feeling among stakeholders that these bills will water down property rights, intellectual property rights in South Africa.
Yes.
Which then threatens the US ownership of whatever intellectual property they have, and they now want to review South Africa's
eligibility there.
Yeah, eligibility into the preferred trade list.
But it sounded like bullying to me. When the way the conditions are being set out, it's like, South Africa, you better go back and fix this, or else we change everything else for you.
Well, I guess if you look at, it's one way of looking at it, and I think we can't argue with that, but there's another way of looking at it. Because they've not decided. They simply said, if it waters down intellectual property, let's consider if South Africa still qualifies, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that the US is likely to go one way or the other. And I think that's their battle as international. I'm not too worried about that one. I'm more worried about the impact these bills are going to have in South Africa on South African artists and South African record companies. Because remember, the multinationals do most of their deals internationally. So the deal between a Universal, a Sony, a Warner is done in LA or wherever with Spotify, Apple Music, Deezer, and all of those guys. So it won't affect them.
Yeah.
These bills will affect local guys, and that's where the debate should be. How will the bills negatively impact on South Africans?
Yes. Okay. You know what? We've spoken so much bureaucracy. It's beginning to. Let's talk about the summers.
Yes. Let's talk about something a lot lighter.
Yeah, something nice.
Brings a smile to my
We
face.
all looking for all of us when the year begins.
Yes.
We know it's December festive. We listen to all this music. How are the preparations going?
I think they're going well. Well, actually, I know they're going well. Right? The one thing about this year in particular and last year, the music that came out. I mean, the year before, summer 25, you started seeing the resurgence of Amapiano.
Yes.
And beginning to become dominant, right? And last year, every other song you listened to or danced to would have been an Amapiano song.
Yes.
So I'm quite excited about how the summers are going to reflect what is happening in the music industry in South Africa.
Because Amapiano is such a very different genre that it's somehow a lot of people seem to have, the reception is
amazing.
It's widespread.
It's absolutely amazing. I guess it just shows an evolution of Kwaito in particular, because we forget that it is an evil.
Yes, because a lot of people said now Kwaito is dead.
No.
How are you then being able to balance the two?
If Kwaito was dead, Amapiano would not be as big as it is, right? Because it is a subgenre of Kwaito, if you really look at it. So those that understand and invest in that music know that Amapiano is, in the same way as Gqom, is not a separate genre. It is a subgenre of Kwaito. So Kwaito is not dying. Kwaito is just, it's evolving. And people need to understand it in that context, that it has evolved. In fact, it has evolved in a number of ways. It also fed, remember when hip-hop started researching?
It was,
it had Kwaito bits.
From your squatter camps
Exactly,
when they came up, yeah.
So Kwaito will continue to...
Even Casper sang some of his music, using some of the Doc Chevelez stuff.
Absolutely. So I think whoever says Kwaito is dying, they need to have their head examined.
Is it because maybe our musical ear is different in the country, maybe, where you have people compartmentalizing what they choose to listen to and then they push that out?
I think for me, it's about that debate that used to happen between fusion and jazz. Right?
Yes.
It's the same thing that we're having in Kwaito. There are people who want to be purists and therefore view Kwaito in that limited space and therefore conclude that because you no longer have that pure Kwaito as they knew it in the 90s, therefore Kwaito is
And the
dead.
beats have changed. I mean, when we listen to Kwaito in the... because remember, in the 80s, we used to listen to our sister Rebecca, Yvonne, and all of that, Chico Twalas.
What used to be called bubblegum music,
Yes,
right?
and
Exactly.
then that changed. And it
And
was
then
good
it
for
moved into
jukebox then.
Kwaito.
It moved into
absolutely.
Kwaito.
Absolutely.
With the dawn of millennium, then we somehow started seeing the twist in the sounds as well. So somehow we are not evolving with our tastes.
I think some are not. Let's not say. I think some of us have refined ears, so we get to understand how it is evolving.
So I want to talk about that. The reason I'm doing that is because we're seeing less of Kwaito in the summers now, but we're seeing more of all these other upcoming artists. And when you look at the summers and the role that they've played so far, how would you sum up their growth when you look at ahead of the one that you're going to have now?
Yeah. I think the good thing, I mean, it's 25 years, and
Yes.
over the last 25 years, we've held the event to recognize our artists every single year. And every single year, we tend to actually reflect what the industry is doing. So we don't necessarily create something new. We, as an industry, recognize, remember our role is to recognize the talent that is out there and be able to highlight it. So right now, we've as I said, we've highlighted the Amapiano, we highlighted Gqom, and we're moving with the times because most people now use or release EPKs as opposed to the full album.
Yes.
And the rules have been adjusted to take into account that change. And therefore, the album, the number of songs required to qualify to be an album has been reduced to 4. So it's a minimum of 4. So that we ensure that those that releases 4 to 5 track EPK, then
they're still eligible as well.
Exactly, they are able to enter.
So now, what's your theme for this year? Because I mean, I believe now with 25 years of that music, you want to make sure that you secure the next summers to actually have more good quality and all of that.
Absolutely.
How are you building around that? What's your work around? What are you doing here?
Remember you said we'll meet and talk just before the summers?
Yes,
We'll have
but
that
now you're revealing
conversation.
our secrets.
Exactly. So at some point we'll have a sit down just talking about the theme because that's what we're busy finalizing right now. And once we finalize our theme for summer 26, remember each year we come up with a new theme.
A new theme.
Exactly. So last year, 25 to Life. This year we'll come up with a new theme and we'll certainly share that with the public.
Okay.
We'll make the public aware of it. But in terms of us looking at growing the brand, right, the biggest challenge we always have is about funding. As you know.
That's what I was about to ask.
We spend too much of our time chasing after funding. And believe it or not, each year we get confirmation of funding around April. and the event is happening the following month, right? And that has had a huge impact in terms of our planning.
Yeah.
And one is hoping that as this year goes, we might just have a sponsor that will be tied up for a longer period. We are negotiating with a few of them, and we're hoping, touch wood, that if we close those, then at least it would allow us to plan way ahead in terms of hosting the event.
Because I don't see why that should be a problem. I mean, it has a tourism element that is
Absolutely.
quite powerful. And being able to, mobilize people around that, I mean, I don't think it should be, you guys should be going through that. So is that part of why some of the things that you don't get to decide, like you said much earlier?
Exactly. It's part of the reason why there's a delay on it. I think we've been lucky so far, and as I said, touch wood, Northwest comes to the party again. I think they've been great in terms of ensuring that they host us, but also that they inject the much needed funding for the event. Would like some of the other private commercial partners to come on board, because it is a brand that recognizes the talent in South Africa. It is the one event that is run by the industry, and it's not privately owned. It's the recording industry of South Africa. It's not a broadcaster. So all of the other awards, either they are format or they are privately owned. This is the one that is owned by the industry.
So then, so how has the cooperation been from the artists themselves, in making sure that they put concerted efforts behind this project to make sure that I mean, I know they do it through their music.
Yeah, they do.
But have they,
Absolutely.
are there any other maybe, road shows or somehow being able to put in effort as well?
I think the other contribution they make, remember that a lot of our members as RISA are artist-driven labels.
Yes.
So it's one artist that's recording himself or herself. They are part of rules. When we start reviewing rules, they are part of that process. So they get involved in terms of shaping how the categories are defined, how the rules are made. So there is that contribution. There's also the contribution whenever we start the roadshow around interviews, etc., where they start mentioning the summer. So there is involvement by artists in terms of the growth of the project.
Okay, now let's talk about the entries now.
Yes.
This year, I know they've been opened, I think. We saw on the
The
website.
entries opened on the 1st of November last year.
Yes.
They'll be closing at the end of this month.
So people don't have enough time.
So those that have not entered yet, they don't have enough time, right? They need to get out there and ensure that they enter. And to enter, it's very simple. Either they phone the office, 011-886-1342, or go on our website, which is www.samusicawards.co.za, and enter.
And most of them are actually familiar with the process.
Most of them they've been entering, a lot of them, every single year. And we know there's a tendency to enter in the last week. It then clogs the system. So please, please, please.
Because we've always had
artists enter now.
Artists complaining that some of them, were not voted whatever enough. Maybe because of that, or as a result of.
Luckily for them, the voting happens. The voting period will announce it, and the process towards voting. And by the way, we've added a music video of the year as a voting category. So now we have two. Remember, you used to have one, which is the record of the year.
Yes.
Now we have the music video of the year as a voting category.
Mr. Sibisi, we'll talk again when closer to the time, just to be able to check.
And I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.